The email arrived at 11:40 at night while I was lying in bed with the TV on low, half watching something I couldn't tell you the name of now if you paid me. My phone buzzed once against the nightstand. For the first 10 minutes, I genuinely thought it was spam. The subject line just said, "Deposit confirmed, $148,000. I almost swiped it away without opening it, the way you do with every other automated notification that clutters up an inbox during the week. Stories like this one only really land for the people who stay until the very end. So if that sounds like you, go ahead and subscribe now, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. This one gets messy fast, and I promise you it's worth staying for. I opened the email out of pure boredom more than suspicion, thumb hovering over the trash icon before I even read past the subject line. And there it was, my grandfather's estate check number, printed clean and official at the top of the confirmation, the exact amount his will said belonged to me, down to the last dollar, deposited into an account that didn't have my name on it at all. It had my stepmother's name on it, Denise. I sat up slowly in bed, the blanket sliding off my shoulder, and read the email again from the top, certain I'd misread something. I hadn't. I read it a third time, same account number, same name. I sat there staring at my phone for what felt like 10 full minutes, my thumb hovering over the screen without moving, doing the math over and over like the numbers might rearrange themselves if I just looked hard enough. My grandfather had passed away 4 months earlier. I still hadn't gotten used to saying that in the past tense. The estate lawyer had told me, more than once, that everything was still sitting in probate, tied up in the slow, procedural way these things always are. Every time I called the check-in, and I called often, probably more than I needed to, Denise had an answer ready before I'd even finished the question. "These things take time," she'd say, her voice warm and patient, like she was doing me a favor by explaining it. "There's a complication with the property appraisal on the lake house. The lawyer's handling it, sweetheart. You don't need to worry about the details." I believed her. That's the part that still gets me, even now, months later. I believed her every single time, in that easy, unquestioning way you believe people who've never given you a reason not to. That night, I couldn't wait until morning. I called the estate lawyer directly, a man named Mr. Whitfield, who'd handled my grandfather's affairs for over a decade. I asked him point blank whether he'd approved Denise to receive or deposit any part of my inheritance.
He went quiet on the line for a second. Then he said, carefully, "I'm sorry, what check? The estate hasn't distributed a single dollar yet. We're still waiting on the final appraisal on the lake house." My stomach dropped straight through the floor. I read him the deposit confirmation line by line. He asked me to forward it to him immediately, and I did, sitting there in the dark with my thumb shaking against the screen. 20 minutes later, he called back. His voice had changed completely, still professional, but sharper now, edged with something close to anger. "I need you in my office first thing tomorrow morning. Bring anything you have. This is a serious problem." I didn't wait until morning to confront the source of it. I didn't even really decide to go. I just found myself pulling my coat on and grabbing my car keys, my hands moving faster than my thoughts could catch up to. I drove straight to my father and Denise's house that night, 20 minutes of empty suburban streets and red lights I barely registered stopping at. The porch light was still on when I pulled into the driveway, the kitchen window glowing yellow against the dark street, ordinary and warm in a way that felt almost obscene given what I was about to do. Denise was standing at the counter chopping vegetables like it was any other Tuesday evening, a pot already simmering on the stove behind her, the smell of garlic thick in the air. My father was traveling for work that week, a conference 2 states away, which I'm sure she was counting on more than she'd ever admit. "Did you cash my inheritance check?" I asked her, standing in the doorway with my coat still zipped up to my chin, not bothering to take my shoes off the way I normally would. She didn't even look up from the cutting board. The blade kept moving, steady, unbothered. Mr. Whitfield said it was fine. It's easier to have everything route through one account first, and then I write you a check once it clears. Saves everyone a headache. Mr. Whitfield told me tonight, on the phone less than an hour ago, that no funds have been distributed. At all. None. Her knife stopped moving mid-slice. The blade hovered over a half-cut carrot for a second too long. She set it down slowly, wiped her hands on the dish towel hanging from the oven handle, and turned to face me fully since I'd walked in. For just a second, I saw something flicker behind her expression, something quick and unguarded, before the calm, patient mask slid right back into place, like she'd practiced it in a mirror. He must have meant the final distribution. This was just a preliminary transfer, to get things moving along. There's no such thing as a preliminary transfer in probate, Denise. Show me the paperwork. I don't owe you an explanation for how I choose to help manage this family's affairs. My grandfather trusted me. That's exactly what I'm doing right now, whether you understand that or not. Then you won't mind if I call the police tonight and report this as fraud. Her whole face changed in an instant. Not fear, not guilt, something closer to outrage, sharp and immediate. You would accuse me of fraud after everything I did for that man? Denise said, her voice climbing, while you barely visited twice a year and called it a relationship.
I let that land without responding to it, standing very still in that doorway, because I already knew exactly what would happen next, and I wanted to see if she'd actually go through with it. Show me the paperwork, right now, or I'm sitting in my car in this driveway filing a police report before I even leave. She stared at me for a long moment, jaw tight, before turning and walking down the hallway toward the home office my father had built 2 summers ago. I stood alone in that kitchen, listening to a filing cabinet drawer slide open and shut somewhere down the hall, the simmering pot behind me the only sound filling the silence. She came back a few minutes later, holding a manila folder against her chest, and handed it to me with an expression that could only be described as smug, like she'd already won something, like she'd expected this exact moment and had the winning card ready in her hand the whole time. Inside was a single-page authorization form, the paper still crisp, like it had been printed recently rather than sitting in a file for months. My name printed neatly at the top, my signature at the bottom, granting Denise permission to receive and deposit inheritance funds directly to her own account on my behalf. Except I had never signed anything like that in my life, not once, not for anything. I looked closer under the kitchen light, tilting the page to catch the overhead bulb better. The signature was close enough to fool someone who wasn't looking carefully, close enough that for half a second my stomach twisted, wondering if I'd somehow forgotten signing something. But the loop on the Y in my name curled the wrong direction. I've made that same small loop the same exact way since I was 12 years old, a habit so automatic I don't even think about it anymore. And this wasn't it. This was someone else's hand trying to imitate mine and getting almost everything right except that one small, telling detail. Then I saw the date printed beside it, 2 months earlier on a Tuesday I remembered specifically because I'd been on a work trip in Seattle that entire week, sitting in conference rooms and hotel bars 3 states away. I pulled up my calendar right there in the kitchen, my phone light too bright in the dim room, and turned the screen around to show her. I was in Washington State on this exact date. Boarding passes, hotel confirmation, all of it. I physically could not have signed this piece of paper. "You must have signed it before your flight," she said, too quickly, the words tumbling out before she'd fully thought them through. "It's dated the day after I left, Denise. Look at it. And I never signed this. Not before, not after, not ever, in any version of reality." She snatched the folder back out of my hands, her fingers tight around the edges of the paper. "It's notarized. It's legal. A licensed notary verified that signature in person in front of witnesses." I looked at the stamp pressed into the bottom corner of the page, the ink slightly smudged at one edge. A name, Renee Castellano, and a commission number beneath it, with a date that lined up neatly with the forged signature above it. Too neatly, in a way that felt less like proof and more like a story someone had rehearsed. I took photos of every page with my phone before she could think to stop me, angling the camera carefully to catch the stamp, the signature, the date, all of it in clear, undeniable focus. My hands were steadier now than they'd been an hour earlier, standing in my own driveway reading that email for the first time. The next morning, I sat across a long conference table from Mr. Whitfield and a probate fraud investigator named Detective Alvarez, a stack of manila folders and printed emails spread out between the three of us. I laid out the deposit confirmation email and the photographs of the forged authorization form side by side, watching Detective Alvarez's eyes move carefully over each page, the way you'd watch a doctor reading test results, trying to guess the diagnosis before they said it out loud. Detective Alvarez made a few calls while Mr. Whitfield and I waited in silence, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, a paper cup of coffee going cold at my elbow. It didn't take long for the pieces to click into place. Renee Castellano, the notary listed on the document, turned out to be a close friend of Denise's from her book club, someone I'd actually met once at a barbecue years earlier and completely forgotten until that moment. She ran a small mobile notary business out of the back of her car, driving to people's homes for a flat fee, the kind of casual side business that runs entirely on trust. The detective called her directly, right there in the office, phone flat on the table between us, and put it on speaker without announcing that we were listening. "Oh, sure, I remember that one," Renee said, her voice easy and relaxed, completely unaware of what she was actually about to confirm. "Late March, right? She came out to my house for it, if I remember correctly." "Can you describe the person who signed the document?" the detective asked, his tone level, giving nothing away. There was a pause on the other end, the sound of her thinking. "I mean, it was a couple months ago at this point, so forgive me if I'm a little fuzzy. Blonde woman, I want to say? Early 30s, maybe?" I sat very still in my chair. I'm a brunette. I was 28 years old at the time, and I have never once in my life been mistaken for blonde. Detective Alvarez thanked her, ended the call without another word, and pulled the file back toward himself, flipping to the notary stamp page again with 2 fingers. "The stamp here says March 15th, but this authorization form wasn't actually filed with the probate court until April 20th. That's 5 full weeks later. Nobody sits on a completed legal authorization for 5 weeks, unless there's a reason to." Mr. Whitfield turned his laptop around on the table so both of us could see the screen, pulling up the official court filing records. Court records confirm receipt on April 20th, time-stamped and logged. If this was genuinely notarized back on March 15th, someone needs to explain why a legally binding authorization form sat in a drawer for over a month before anyone thought to file it with the court. Then he clicked into a separate document, scrolled for a moment, and his expression hardened completely, the friendly, patient tone from earlier in the meeting draining out of his voice entirely. "Your inheritance check was issued on April 18th, 2 days before this authorization was ever filed with the court. She deposited the check on April 19th, the day after it was cut, and the day before she filed the paperwork claiming to have had permission to do exactly that." Nobody said anything for a moment. The timeline wasn't just suspicious anymore, sitting there in black and white on 2 different screens. It was airtight, undeniable proof that the entire authorization had been fabricated after the fact, backdated on paper to try to cover a deposit that had already quietly happened weeks before any of us knew to look for it. Denise broke down when Detective Alvarez called her in for questioning that same afternoon. She cried, said it was a misunderstanding, said she'd been planning to give me the money all along, said she thought she was allowed to help manage things while the estate finished processing. Detective Alvarez wasn't moved by any of it. "Ma'am, you deposited a check that legally belonged to someone else, using a forged signature backed by a notary stamp that was applied after the fact. That's forgery, bank fraud, and theft, all documented in writing. We're going to need you to come down to the station." She called my phone 17 times that night. I counted because at some point, counting felt easier than listening to another voicemail. Every message followed the same pattern. First pleading, then guilt, then finally something close to a threat, insisting I was destroying our family over a simple mix-up, telling me my grandfather would be ashamed of how I was handling this. I blocked her number before sunrise and drove to the police station myself to file the formal report in person. The bank froze the account within 48 hours and opened its own internal fraud investigation. Renee Castellano lost her notary commission entirely and was charged as an accessory to the forgery. Denise was charged with felony forgery, bank fraud, and theft, and the district attorney's office told me directly that the paper trail, the deposit date, the check issue date, the mismatched filing date made it one of the more straightforward cases they'd seen in years.
My father called me 2 days after her arrest. His voice sounded hollow in a way I'd never heard him before. He told me he was filing for divorce, said he couldn't wrap his head around what she'd done, and that he was ashamed it had taken this long for either of us to see it clearly. But not everyone in the family saw it the way he did. Denise's sister, Carol, started messaging me within hours of the arrest, and then posting about it publicly, calling me vindictive, calling me a spoiled brat who couldn't let a grieving widow make one honest mistake, telling anyone who'd listen that I should have handled this quietly, privately, as a family, instead of running straight to the police over a misunderstanding. Half of my extended family stopped speaking to me over the following weeks. Some of them believe to this day that I overreacted, that I could have simply taken my money back and let the rest go. I got my inheritance back, every dollar of it eventually, once the fraud case worked its way through the court system. But I lost a version of my family I didn't realize I'd still been holding on to until it was already gone. People ask me sometimes if I regret calling the police that first night instead of trying to work it out quietly across the kitchen counter. I don't, not for 1 second, because the version of this story where I stayed quiet isn't a story about a misunderstanding. It's a story about a woman who got away with it, and I wasn't willing to be the reason that happened. If you've ever had someone in your own family try to convince you that reporting the truth makes you the villain, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments what you would have done in that kitchen. And if this story kept you until the very last word, subscribe now, because there are more stories exactly like this one coming every week.